When it comes to dealing with difficulties in life, most of us tend to assume, whenever there is a problem, we must face it and solve it immediately. At first glance, this notion seems strong, decisive, and sometimes even praised as courageous. However, if we look more deeply with the eyes of mindfulness and wisdom, we will realize, facing everything head-on is not always the optimal solution, and avoiding something is not necessarily an act of cowardice. In both spiritual practice and daily life, knowing when to advance and when to retreat, that is, the wisdom to choose appropriate action, is truly essential. The Buddha emphasized in many discourses that, in order to uproot defilements, a practitioner must observe the causes of their arising and from there, choose the suitable method to deal with them. One of the most crucial yet often overlooked methods is avoidance. But avoidance of what? Not avoidance of responsibilities, nor challenges that help us grow. Rather, it is avoiding the direct causes that stir up greed, anger, delusion, restlessness, and suffering within our mind. If we fail to practice proper avoidance, our path of cultivation will not only slow down but also run the risk of descending into deeper suffering. Let's explore this more deeply. Defilements arising from the lack of avoidance, their nature, manifestations, and practical lessons. Defilements caused by lack of avoidance. 1. The concept of defilements from lack of avoidance. Defilements are negative mental states that cause suffering. Among the causes of their arising, lack of avoidance is particularly dangerous because it does not manifest immediately like obvious wrong actions, such as overt greed or anger, but rather grows silently by placing ourselves in environments and situations that stimulate unwholesome mental states. Practical examples. Someone trying to overcome addiction but still frequently visiting old groups involved in indulgent behavior. Someone aspiring to live a pure life yet constantly engaging in gossip, envy, and conflict. A meditation practitioner not being vigilant against the lure of excessive entertainment and distractions. The inevitable result, despite having good initial intentions without knowing how to avoid unwholesome environments, the mind gradually becomes tainted and weakened. Backhand index pointing right. In short, lack of avoidance is like opening the door for defilements to seep into the mind silently and persistently. 2. Foundational teachings from the suttas. In many discourses, such as the Discourse on the Root of All Taints, Majjhima Nikaya 2, the Buddha taught, there are taints that should be abandoned by avoidance. He gave very specific examples. We should avoid wild elephants, dangerous horses, venomous snakes, thorny bushes, deep pits, dangerous rivers, unsuitable dwellings, and bad companions. The profound point here is, the Buddha did not only speak of physical dangers, like wild animals or natural hazards, but also warned about spiritual dangers, bad places, and unwholesome company. This highlights that spiritual danger is even more frightening than physical danger, because it can damage the entire path of awakening if we are not mindful. 3. Deep analysis of avoidance. 3. 1. Avoidance based on wisdom, not fear. A wise person avoids because they clearly understand the nature of danger. An unwise person avoids based on unfounded fear and anxiety. In practice, avoidance does not mean shrinking away, suppressing oneself, or denying responsibility. Rather, it is protecting the wholesome qualities in the mind and preserving the energy of mindfulness, preventing the mind from being scattered and weakened by unwholesome conditions. 3. 2. Avoidance is guarding the mind. In the Noble Eightfold Path, under right effort, one essential aspect is preventing the arising of unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. Avoidance is a proactive way to cut off defilements at their root. Example: if you know a place is full of temptations, the decision to not go there in the first place is already a powerful way to keep your mind pure and steady. 3. Avoidance helps maintain mindfulness and concentration. When the body stays away from unwholesome environments, the mind naturally becomes calmer and more stable, thus making it easier to maintain continuous mindfulness. Only with continuous mindfulness can wisdom arise and grow. 4. Practical consequences of failing to avoid. 1. Defilements will arise from unwholesome environments. If we constantly expose ourselves to greed, anger, envy, and sensory indulgence, even if we have initial good intentions, eventually, we will be tainted and fall into unwholesome patterns. 2. Easy to lose direction on the spiritual path. Defilements obscure clarity, weaken resolve, and make the spiritual journey longer, harder, and more painful. Why is avoidance so important? 1. Avoidance is the first shield for the mind. The mind is inherently delicate and easily influenced. At birth, no one carries deep-rooted greed, anger, or delusion. These seeds gradually grow through experiences, environments, and habitual exposure. If we liken the mind to a garden, then avoidance is like building a fence to protect young, tender plants from harsh storms and wild beasts. Without that fence, no matter how diligently we sow seeds of virtue and wisdom, they are still vulnerable to being trampled or swept away before they can take root. Thus, avoiding dangers, both external and internal, is the first act of compassion toward our own mind. Emotionally speaking, knowing how to avoid is like telling yourself, I truly cherish this mind. I refuse to let it be polluted so easily. 2. Avoidance prevents suffering at the root. In life, how many regrets and pains are born simply because we were careless in choosing our environment? A moment of entering a harmful place. A moment of following bad company. A moment of indulging in impulsive desires. And then months, even years, of struggle and sorrow ensue. Avoidance is not about weakness, it is about clarity. It is recognizing the subtle yet devastating power of unwholesome conditions, and consciously choosing not to give them any opportunity to take root in our hearts. By avoiding early, we prevent small sparks from becoming raging fires. We do not need to waste our lives constantly extinguishing fires that could have been prevented. Emotionally speaking, avoidance is a silent act of love, love for your future self, love for peace yet to bloom. 3. Avoidance creates a space for wisdom and strength to grow. When we deliberately avoid polluted environments, avoid inflaming toxic emotions, we naturally open up space for mindfulness to be sustained, space for the heart to heal and regenerate, space for inner strength and understanding to mature. In a noisy, restless environment, the voice of wisdom is easily drowned out. But in a protected, tranquil space, wisdom begins to whisper, and over time, its voice grows strong and clear. Thus, avoidance is not simply about running away, it is about creating fertile conditions for the noblest parts of us to flourish. Emotionally speaking, choosing to avoid is like quietly sowing light into the soil of your being, trusting that one day it will blossom into immense freedom and clarity. 4. Avoidance is a manifestation of courage, not cowardice. Many people mistakenly think that facing everything head-on is bravery, and avoiding is fear. But in truth, it takes great courage to admit our own limitations. Courage to recognize, my current mind is not strong enough to withstand this temptation. Courage to say no to the pressures of conformity. Courage to walk a different, lonelier path, simply because it is the right one. In the early stages of spiritual practice, when the roots of mindfulness and wisdom are still fragile. Choosing avoidance is the choice of a person who truly sees reality, who does not deceive themselves or overestimate their strength. Emotionally speaking, avoidance is not an escape, it is a vow whispered from the soul. I vow to protect what is most beautiful in me, until it becomes unshakable. Thus, understanding the profound role of avoidance is crucial if we wish to walk firmly on the path of awakening. In the next section we will explore how to practice skillful avoidance without falling into fear, isolation, or rigidity. Applying avoidance in modern life. In today's world, flooded with information, a hectic pace, and countless temptations, practicing avoidance is no longer a luxury. It has become a survival skill to protect the mind, preserve inner peace, and nurture wisdom. Here's how we can apply avoidance in a concrete, mindful, and deeply meaningful way. 1. Avoid toxic environments. The outer world, where we work, live, and entertain ourselves, profoundly impacts our inner world. If we don't choose wisely, we can be poisoned without even realizing it. Types of environments we must consciously avoid. Negative spaces. Places full of complaining, blaming, jealousy, and gossip slowly corrode our inner peace. Violent spaces. Environments where abuse, conflict, and oppression are tolerated can numb or embitter our hearts, even if we're not fully aware of it. Panic-inducing sensational news. Constant consumption of negative news, disasters, and scandals leaves the mind trapped in anxiety, fear, and despair, like an invisible disease. Practical application. Be highly selective about what you watch, read, and listen to each day. Limit contact with groups or environments that radiate clear negative energy. Set boundaries for news and social media consumption. Don't let yourself be swept away by collective anxiety. On an emotional level, every time you courageously step away from a toxic environment, you are protecting the seeds of goodness and clarity within your soul. 2. Avoid meaningless or harmful conversations. Not every conversation is worth engaging in. Some discussions are just arenas for arguing, bragging, envy, or spreading unrest. Practical application. Decline invitations to gossip or participate in idle talk. Maintain silence in the face of attacks or unnecessary provocations. Choose interactions that nurture kindness, understanding, and gratitude. On an emotional level, remaining silent amidst meaninglessness is a way of honoring the voice of wisdom within yourself. 3. Avoid habits that poison the body and mind. In modern life, many seemingly harmless habits quietly erode our energy and soul. For example, mindlessly scrolling through social media for hours. Watching violent or sexually exploitative media. Shopping or eating compulsively just to fill emotional voids. Practical application. Build mindful daily routines. Spend time meditating, reading, moving your body gently, and caring for yourself in meaningful ways. Learn to stop as soon as you realize you're slipping into energy-draining behaviors. On an emotional level, each time you reject a self-destructive habit, you are sending a powerful, loving message to yourself. I deserve a life of mindfulness and vibrant energy. In a world where pollution is not just environmental but deeply spiritual, avoidance has become an art of conscious living. It's not because we fear the world, but because we love ourselves enough to give our souls a chance to grow in light and kindness. Profound lessons from the educational spirit of the Buddha. In the teachings of the Buddha, we find not only moral principles but also a deep and practical educational system. The Buddha did not only teach us methods to develop wisdom and spirituality, but he also opened up ways to live peacefully and effectively in daily life. His educational spirit is a profound process of Awareness and action, helping us confront and overcome suffering in an intelligent way. 1. The importance of practicing avoidance. In modern life, avoidance is not a form of evasion or running away, but rather a deliberate and purposeful way of living, helping us steer clear of elements that could harm our mind and spirit. The Buddha taught that not all problems can be solved by force or confrontation. Sometimes, it is the act of avoiding harmful environments that is the wisest way to protect oneself from negative influences. Profound lessons from the Buddha. Avoid harmful environments. The Buddha did not encourage confronting harmful situations directly, but instead emphasized choosing and avoiding circumstances that could harm the soul. This helps us preserve our wisdom and compassion and prevents us from getting caught up in futile arguments, anger, and suffering. The ability to develop awareness of suffering. The Buddha not only taught us to avoid negative situations but also emphasized becoming aware of suffering within ourselves. When we realize that we are facing negativity or are being influenced by suffering, pausing and allowing ourselves to avoid those negative influences is an effective method. 2. The Buddha's educational method, compassion and patience. In the Buddha's educational spirit, we also see the importance of compassion and patience. The Buddha did not advise us to avoid everything blindly, but rather to have a compassionate and generous attitude toward ourselves and others. Practicing avoidance in life is about being aware of our limits, not allowing ourselves or others to be harmed, and also respecting the process of our spiritual growth. Profound lessons from the Buddha. Knowing when to stop. The Buddha teaches us that it is not always necessary to confront or act in every situation. Knowing when to stop and avoid will help us avoid situations that harm both ourselves and others. This is not weakness but maturity in awareness and action. Patience and perseverance. Sometimes, avoidance is a form of patience, waiting for the right moment, not rushing, not acting impulsively in decisions. The Buddha taught us the value of being patient, not getting caught up in conflicts or unnecessary situations but instead waiting for the right opportunity to act. 3. Education and self-awareness. One of the key elements of the Buddha's education is self-awareness. He taught that, to liberate ourselves from suffering, we must be able to observe ourselves objectively and honestly. Only when we are fully aware of ourselves and the world around us can we decide when to avoid and when to face a situation. Profound lessons from the Buddha. Self-awareness is the key to freedom. The Buddha encourages us not to live according to habits but to have the ability to reflect on ourselves, recognizing the negative aspects of our mind and actions. Once we realize our suffering, we will understand when we need to avoid and when we need to change our attitude to help our soul find peace. Conclusion. The Buddha's educational spirit as the foundation for a peaceful life. Finally, the lessons from the Buddha's educational spirit help us understand that avoidance is not about escaping but is a wise method of living. The key is to learn how to recognize the dangers and challenges and manage our minds so that we are not drawn into harmful environments. This avoidance method helps us protect our souls, nurture our wisdom, and live a life of tranquility, free from unnecessary suffering. From these lessons, we can conclude that a peaceful life comes not only from confrontation and overcoming but also from the wisdom of knowing when to stay away from harmful environments, when to stop, and when to protect ourselves. Conclusion. The path of wisdom and avoidance in Buddhist teachings. The Buddhist teachings are rich with wisdom and practical methods that can be applied in daily life to reduce suffering and increase peace. The principle of avoidance is one such powerful tool that, when used wisely, can significantly improve our mental and emotional well-being. It is not about running away or evading responsibility but about choosing the right circumstances and environments that nurture our inner peace. Through mindful avoidance, we create space for personal growth, reflection, and deeper understanding. The Buddha's educational spirit encourages us to look within and assess situations and environments we expose ourselves to. By understanding when to avoid harmful influences, whether they are negative people, violent environments, or toxic thoughts, we act not out of fear but out of wisdom and self-care. Moreover, the Buddha's teachings on self-awareness, compassion, and patience guide us to make conscious decisions in life. Avoidance is not about avoiding challenges altogether, but about knowing when to step back, regain balance, and reflect. It teaches us to respect our own boundaries and to take the necessary steps to prevent unnecessary harm to our minds and souls. Ultimately, through the wisdom of avoidance and other teachings, the Buddha shows us how to navigate life's challenges more peacefully. By practicing mindful avoidance, we find the strength to protect ourselves, not by running away from life's difficulties, but by making wise choices that lead to greater clarity, inner peace, and spiritual progress. In modern life, where distractions and stressors are abundant, the Buddha's advice to avoid harmful environments becomes even more relevant. It is a practical and compassionate approach to ensure that we live in harmony with ourselves and the world around us, guiding us to lead a life that is free from unnecessary suffering and full of wisdom and tranquility. By reflecting on these teachings and incorporating them into our daily lives, we can unlock the potential for lasting peace and inner transformation, just as the Buddha intended.